Welcome, everybody. Thank you so very, very much for joining us, especially with everything that's going on. My name is Blake Bailey. I am the team lead here for customer success at Process Street. So today, what we're going to be doing is something really, really special. What we want to talk about is, essentially how you can use process and technology to, essentially proof your business against pandemics or just any sort of, negative circumstances, whether it be something like what's going on right now or anything in the future, or realistically, even just to have a well-run business for good times. So without further ado, what I'm going to be doing today is that we actually have a really special guest. Okay, so I'd like to go ahead and introduce for you Nick Sonnenberg. So he is the founder and CEO of Leverage. It's getleverage.com. It's essentially a company that will that provides you with virtual. They used to be virtual assistants, but now they actually do really special, high-end, premium, different types of services. Whatever your business needs to do, you're able to outsource it to their team. They have experts that are able to take care of that for you for a good rate. Now, on top of that, he's also the author of Idea to Execution, another book on the way. I'll let him talk about that later on. He's also a featured and a regular writer for Inc. and some other really big business and productivity editorials. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over. Let's just make sure. Let me see if I've got Nick here. Nick, are you ready to go?
Yeah. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can. Awesome. Well, welcome, Nick.
Well, thanks for having me, Blake. And hello, everyone who I can't hear, but I hope you can hear and see me. I'm happy to be here, and I'm a long-time fan and customer of Process Street, and just wanted to give Blake and Vinay a shout out for everything that they're doing, because their tool is awesome and definitely going to be part of this presentation. I created a link to people to get some additional resources to this talk, and that is ps.getleverage.com. So if you want to follow along, there's going to be some additional tools that we won't have time to get to in this. So I've dumped a whole bunch of really robust, awesome things there. And I also have, if you're interested in this topic, aside from that, I have a free Facebook group called How to Make Remote Work Actually Work, where we geek out on this stuff. And I share I unveil the curtain with how we're currently doing things at Leverage. So in the next hour or so, I'm going to be sharing with you 6 tools that are going to save you at least 6 hours a week if you use them right. Process Street is one of those tools. And as Blake mentioned before, I'm Nick. So I'm going to be sharing with you some insights that I've learned along my journey and path, both as an entrepreneur, but also as a business efficiency consultant. I wrote a book called Idea to Execution, which is about the story of how I bootstrapped my company Leverage to 7 figures in the first year, fully remote company, 150 people, by leveraging in smart ways, no pun intended, leveraging, but by using technology and tools in smart ways. And that's really what I'm passionate about, and that's what I write about for Inc. And I have a new book coming out called Come Up for Air: How Your Team Can Leverage Systems and Tools to Stop Drowning in Work. And also, as Blake mentioned before, my company Leverage, our tagline is that we help businesses unlock their growth potential by helping them maximize both their top line revenue, which would be marketing and sales related activities, as well as their bottom line, helping them operate more efficiently and get set up with some of the things I'm about to share with you. So what you might be, if you're an entrepreneur, business owner, even part of a team, you might be thinking right now with the whole transition, how do I stay connected with my team? How do we stay aligned? How do we hold people accountable? How do I minimize the impact of what's happening right now? Now, whether you're someone that was already used to remote, or this is the first time that you've ever operated remotely and you're used to being co-located, the next 45 or so minutes is relevant for you, because you can never be too efficient. I'm myself constantly sharpening my toolbox of not just what tools are out there, but what are other ways to use the current tools that we use and think about them in different ways. So I think that this is going to be helpful regardless if you are used to being co-located or you were used to already being remote. It's a never-ending journey. Now, I'm not going to have time to share the answers to this quiz, but if you go to ps.getleverage.com, I've put an answer key in there. And I like to show this at the beginning of any presentation because what this does is it highlights what I like to call the scavenger hunt in your business. So I've just listed out a few common examples of things that happen in day-to-day, week-to-week activity. Some are personal, some are business related. And my point here with this is if you were to share this with your team, 10 out of 10 times, you're going to get totally different responses to where they think and everyone in your team thinks is the most appropriate place for that information to live. And when you do that exercise with your team and you see how fragmented and how disjointed people's answers are, it makes you realize the effect that this has on your business in terms of what I call the scavenger hunt, where information is all over the place and it takes 10 times longer to find information. So again, in that link I gave, I have an answer key, so you could do that on your own time. But the business efficiency framework, which I've created, and this is what I created this within Leverage based off of trial and error. But what I found was when people started reaching out to me asking me to consult, and I've consulted for 2-person gas and water leak detection companies up to Tony Robbins, Ethereum, and some other large companies. And what I found was whether you were remote or co-located, whether you were a 2-person or 1,000-person, no matter what industry you were in, every business, no matter what in the world, has these 3 buckets that they have to be thinking about to be operationally efficient. You have to communicate with your team, you have to plan, and what I call resource is really knowledge management. You have to have a place to store knowledge. So the sake of tools like Process Street, Slack, whatever the tool is, no one likes adding another tool. The tool has to give you value. And for me, the value of tools like Process Street is underpinned by this philosophy that I have, that a company can only scale as fast as you can transfer knowledge. Knowledge transfer could be a process. It could be a thought. It could be delegating a project or a task. But whatever it is, the faster that knowledge can be transferred, the faster that your company can scale. And if you can remove those roadblocks and those inefficiencies from your company, you allow your business to thrive in a fluid and frictionless way. So the lens that I'm always looking at these things through is this tool, or is the way I'm using this tool, going to help me transfer knowledge faster? And if the answer is yes, then it becomes interesting and we investigate it. Now, an interesting point that I like to make is it's easier to implement any change in a company, any new tool, the sooner you do it. So if you are on this webinar right now and you're a 10-person team, it's going to be far easier for you to set up Process Street or Slack or Asana or whatever the tool is now versus when you're 40 people. Or if you're 100 people, you're never too late. If you're 100 people, it's better to do it now than when you're 200. It gets harder over time. And this is something I like to showcase. When you're a 3-person team, there's 3 ways for you to connect. When you're a 4-person team, there are 6 ways to connect. 5, 10 ways to connect. And you get the point. Even a 14-person team, there's 90 ways to connect. So you can imagine what that graph looks like if you're a 100-person company. So the bigger you are, the more opportunity that you have to create a scavenger hunt in your business. And this operational framework I'm going to be sharing with you, CPR, helps you to continue operating in a fluid and frictionless way, even as your team scales. And right now we're living in unprecedented times, and there's no better time in history to take a step back and do what I like to call paying back your operational debt, right? So as a business owner or entrepreneur, the focus is always about sales, revenue, marketing, and it's not always the sexiest or most interesting activity to go and clean up your Slack channels or to go and document your processes and set it up with Zapier, right? Everyone's always focused on revenue, but it's multiplication by subtraction. And we're all, just like in software development, there's the concept of technical debt, which basically means you have to just anticipate that every 1 to 2 years, you're going to have to rewrite a huge amount of your code base because of how things have changed. It's the same with operations, and I like to call this your operational debt. There's no better time to pay back your operational debt. We've all been there, including myself, where we sweep issues under the rug. And right now is an extremely useful and special moment of time where the pause button has been hit for a lot of people. And now is the time to document those processes, pay back that operational debt, and get your company on an operational foundation so that you can scale far beyond the reach that you previously would have been able to do so. So without further ado, let's just dive right into the CPR framework. So CPR starts with communication, and it's for a reason, and that's because communication is like the oxygen of your company. If you're not communicating efficiently and effectively, everything else falls to the side. So some very simple tricks and suggestions to help clean up that scavenger hunt. So first, I bucket communication into 3 buckets. You have personal, which I recommend text. You have email, which is for clients or JVs or anyone external. And then you have tools like Slack and Microsoft Teams, which are for internal communication. So that alone, if you don't do anything else out of this presentation, just that helps you immediately simplify and reduce the scavenger hunt. Because then you could be like, oh, Blake is on my team. He messaged me about something. I better look in Slack, right? So you're not looking, was that in a group text or was that in an email or a group email? You know, you've simplified it and you know at least the platform to be looking at. But that's not enough, but it's still a huge step forward just by doing that. So within these tools, you have to be optimizing how you use the tool. So it's one thing to know when to use a tool, but then you have to know how to use a tool. So email is one of the most misused tools that I come across in my private clients that I work with. One of the biggest misconceptions is people think that they're at inbox 0, but they're really at unread 0. And you might be on this webinar right now thinking to yourself, oh man, you're right. I thought I handled email right, but it's really just I'm at unread. It's not the same. Your eye is still processing that, whether it's bold or not bold, and it's causing cognitive overload, and it's not giving you, really the only way to think about email is it's an external to-do list that people can add to. That's all it is. And so you want to get your inbox to 0 because you want to clear off your to-do list. And there's some really robust pieces of functionality that most people don't know about. So one is the snooze feature in email. And you could see if you're using Gmail, there's that little clock icon that I'm pointing to on the screen. And what that does is, the use case is, imagine there's an email that came in and you don't want to deal with it today, but it's relevant next Thursday. It could be information about a lead and you have a call with that lead next Thursday. Well, you don't need to clutter your inbox between now and next Thursday. You snooze it to next Thursday, 8 a.m. when it's relevant, and then it pops right back into your inbox when you need it to. And the beauty of this is if there's any update to that email between now and Thursday, it will automatically disable the snooze and go back to the top of your inbox immediately. So that's a really huge trick. I have an acronym for managing inboxes called RAD. You either reply, you archive, or defer. So that clock icon is the defer. And if we had another hour or so together, I could dive deep into all the nuances and settings and tricks with email. But we don't have time for that now. But even this alone should get you pretty far. Now, the best way to get to inbox 0 is to get to email 0. So all the stuff that you were doing with personal or internal or project management, pull it out of email and put it in the most appropriate place. And that's really the biggest kind of iteration of cleanup that you could do. So team communication. So there are some fantastic tools called Slack and Microsoft Teams. And why these are so much better than using text or email, there's a few reasons. So one is you have channels. And all that a channel is it's a topic of conversation to organize a conversation. So you could have a channel for finance and have all the people in your company that need to be talking about finance in a finance channel. You could have a marketing channel and talk about marketing. So as opposed to having random text message group chats or email threads with people, you could talk about finance in a finance channel, marketing in a marketing channel with all the relevant people. And the best thing is, if someone were to leave or quit, or you hire another person, you just add them to the channel and they can see the whole history of the conversation in there. And you can get as granular as you want. So you could have naming conventions of your channels like finance, and then you could put a hyphen, and then you could do some more specific topics. So you could have finance hyphen payroll and just talk about payroll in that channel. You could have finance hyphen tax and just talk about tax. So you could get very, very granular with the topic. And what that does, again, is it helps you go back to principle one. It helps you retrieve information as fast as possible, right? The other power feature that Slack has are the integrations. And here are just a couple of the integrations, but there's thousands of them. And this is really what makes Slack become a really powerful tool. So one that everyone likes is Giphy. And especially if you are new to remote, Giphy is really, it sounds silly, but it's really something that helps you maintain culture. So instead of telling someone great job or awesome or whatever, you could do /Giphy awesome. And it really lightens the mood and makes Slack become a more fun, enjoyable place, because at the end of the day, you're going to spend a lot of time in this tool. So you might as well make it as enjoyable as you can. So if you do this right and you use these third-party integrations and you use tools like Zapier, which is an automation tool, which also integrates with Process Street, if you use all these things right, you can turn Slack into a command center where information is getting passed into the relevant channel, and you don't even really have to leave Slack to get the high-level information that you need on the company. So that tool Zapier we've been talking about, here's an example of what Zapier looks like, but Zapier is an automation tool that's kind of a layer across everything in the company. And what it is, if you don't know, it's kind of like the glue between two different third-party tools. So when something happens over here, do this over there. So in this case, someone signs up on the website. So we get notified in Stripe. That's the trigger. And then the action is update things in Salesforce, reformat some of the information, add them to our email marketing list, create a checklist in Process Street, update Airtable, and then it triggers a webhook to do some other more advanced stuff. So you could see if I had a human do this, it would probably take 5 minutes. Not only that, the human probably wouldn't enjoy doing this because it's very repetitive and menial. They probably would mess up one in every 10 or 100 times, and then fixing it, you have to factor that in. So Zapier is never going to mess up. It's free. Like, you pay a monthly fee, but I don't have to pay additional for the 5 minutes I just got back. It's never going to complain, mess up, ask for a vacation, get anything. It's amazing. So we've built leverage off of hundreds, if not thousands, of these little micro automations, but it all stacks up. So enough about Zapier. One thing with communication, just wrapping that up before we get into planning, is you have to be thinking about how do you keep culture alive while you're remote. And one of the best ways to do that is to show your face. Now, you can't show your face in person, but what I do recommend is record yourself. Either you could spin up a Zoom meeting just for yourself and record yourself speaking. You could use your phone and record a video message. But sometimes it's really important to show your face to your team. And sometimes I'll just give an update that I could have written, but I'll record it so my team is still seeing my face, hearing my tone, and still getting the information they need. But little things like that go a long way. I was in Bali last year, and I had a 2-hour car ride with no Wi-Fi. So I used that as an opportunity to spend 2 hours doing video messages to the team from my phone. And then when I got to the hotel and I had Wi-Fi, I sent those videos to all the respective people. So aside from it being a really good productivity trick, it's a great way to maintain culture while you're remote. So the P of CPR is plan. And the way that I like to explain this is, imagine you were going to go camping in the forest with your team. You would need walkie-talkies to communicate, but you would also need a map to navigate out of the forest. So Slack, Teams, email, those are all walkie-talkies. It's fundamentally different than a map. So don't mix up your walkie-talkie with your map. A lot of people make the mistake of texting people on their team like, hey, could you do this by this date? Or emailing them. And those tools are great tools, but it's just not built for task or project management. A task or project management system, at a high level, what you're trying to achieve is any individual in your team should know exactly what the highest priority thing they need to do at any moment is. And then from the business owner standpoint, you need to have a pulse on what's getting done this sprint, this week, this month, this quarter, who's doing what. So in communication tools, there's no concept of prioritization or owners or due dates. So they're just not built for that. And it's just too easy for things to slip through the cracks because a communication tool is not built for that purpose. So that's why it's important to have in your operation stack, have some form of a project management system. And here are just a handful of them. There's dozens, if not hundreds of them. At Leverage, we use Asana. But honestly, it's less about what tool you use. It's how you. It's not what the tool is. It's how you use it. So knowing when to use it and how to use the tool is the most important. And here are just a few screenshots of Asana. But what I love about Asana is they have one easy button called My Tasks, which across everything, you could be in 1,000 projects. It aggregates and you could prioritize your day, your week, your month very, very easily with this tool. And then you could also do some more interesting things like group projects into clusters and see kind of in one overview, have optics at a high level. What's the status of all the key projects for the quarter? You could have dependencies on projects, so you could get a pulse on what's getting done this sprint and what's dependent on what. And you can even use Asana to manage your meeting agendas. So we have projects in Asana called agendas, and we're putting all of the agenda items we want to discuss into that project. And this has been a huge productivity gain for us because we have a rule at Leverage that if something's not urgent and it can wait till next week's meeting, add it to the agenda. Right? Because there's all that research. If you've ever read Cal Newport's book, Deep Work, there's all that research that if you're in a flow state and you get taken out of a flow state, it takes you like 14 minutes to get back into it. So if you can reduce the number of distractions and pings you get, it's a huge gain for you. And having an agenda is a critical piece of that puzzle in order to do that. And a rule that we have at Leverage is no agenda, no meeting. And we stick by that, and it's really that's really, really important. And some additional pro tips in your meetings, we found that it's best to have a moderator, and that moderator, aside from keeping the pace and rhythm of the meeting on track, the other duties of the moderator are to document any decisions that were made and manage the report outs and the next steps, putting that into Asana. If you set these things up properly, what you'll find in your company, your team, your organization is you're going to have alignment, transparency. Things aren't going to slip through the cracks, and you're going to become much, much, much more productive, not just as an individual, but as an entire company. And then lastly, resource is all about digitizing your knowledge. And I separate knowledge into two buckets. I separate it into wikis and process. So for me, a wiki answers the question, and here are a few examples of wikis. We use at Leverage, we use Notion. But a wiki answers the question who, what, when, where, why. So what are the objectives and key results of the year? What are our strengths? Who's the CEO? When is the monthly town hall? So that's still knowledge. It's still information that you need to capture, but it's not a process. It's static is the word that I like to use. A process is still knowledge, but it's dynamic, and it answers the question how. So how do you onboard a new team member? How do you do payroll? So it's still something that you want to capture. It's still knowledge, but it's a process, meaning it's a sequence of steps where it has to be done in a particular order. Maybe if you're onboarding a marketer, it's a different set of steps than a developer. But in any case, you have these two buckets. You have static and dynamic knowledge. Process Street is a fantastic tool for documenting that, the processes or the dynamic knowledge. Benefits that you'll see after you take this seriously and implement this in your company is, one, it's going to de-risk your company, right? If someone were to get sick, God forbid, with coronavirus, which is a legitimate concern right now, if you have things well documented, you could hand it over to someone else and they should be able to execute the process. You save time on repeating because now people don't have to go and ask how things are done. It's in one place. So you save a lot of time, not to mention it integrates with tools like Zapier. So you could start automating parts of your processes. And the last key benefit that I found is it helps you to have breakthroughs in your company. And what I mean by a breakthrough is, when I was in my past life, I was a high frequency algorithmic trader on Wall Street for 8 years. And in that job, we used to have to take what's called a 2-week block leave. So what that means is they want to make sure that you're not hiding any trades. And so I would have to leave for 2 weeks, but back then there weren't tools like Process Street. So I'd have to go old school and I'd have to write out how my algorithms worked, what the process was to start my book, what was happening in the market. And bottom line is, when I would get back from vacation after the 2 weeks, even though I was the expert at that process or that algorithm or that trading strategy, there was always, for 8 years in a row, always an improvement to how my book traded. And that's because fresh eyes spark innovation. And when you start facilitating a culture and a work environment of documenting process, you could then start rotating positions. And every quarter when we do our planning, we plan for at least one, if not two rotations. And what we do is we stress test that the processes are well documented. And so maybe for a week, someone else does payroll and someone else onboards new team members. But what you can only do that by having it well documented. And what that does is it gets you breakthroughs. Fresh eyes spark innovation. So having someone new on something, they're going to be looking at it from another perspective. And it stress tests that you don't fall into the bucket of, well, I'm doing it this way because it's always been done this way. You have people stress test the process, ask questions. Why are we doing it this way? And it helps you always innovate and not just get stale with how you do things. So like I mentioned before, aside from the ability to rotate or the ability to de-risk the company, this tool integrates with tools like Zapier, and you could start automating different steps of processes. Not to mention there's other things just internally to the tool itself that helps you to automate the workflows. But here's an example of one of our processes at Leverage about hiring. So as you can see, there's input fields like John Doe, the email, and then you could select what department they are getting hired for, and then dynamically different steps in the hiring process will dynamically be revealed or hidden based off of what the job position is for. So again, a few tips to this stuff, but right now I think, especially where things are in the world, it is more critical than ever to identify backups. And right now, be proactive rather than reactive, and stress test your processes and systems with someone else when you can control it versus when it controls you. And then in general, best practice I find is to rotate at least one position a quarter for a week to stress test your processes. So I know this was a bit of a fire hose, but if you implement these 3 parts of CPR, what you're going to find is you're going to eliminate the scavenger hunt in your business, which we all want, and you will hopefully one day make your company be a well-oiled machine. So that's all I got for you. Again, I'm Nick Sonnenberg. This is my personal email. That's a link if you joined late. ps.getleverage.com is a link where this presentation, I've uploaded it to that link, as well as a few other free resources. And I have a free Facebook group. You could get to it just by going to remote.getleverage.com. So are there any questions, Blake?
Hey, yeah, actually, the first one that I have here is a, pretty fun one. Pretty straightforward. Michael Johnson asks, "What kind of microphone are you using, Nick?"
It's a Procaster.
Nice, very
Yeah,
cool.
so
Yeah,
it's
sounds pretty
by
good.
Rode. RODE is the brand of microphone.
Awesome. Yeah, actually, so everyone, this is the time. So please go ahead and start submitting some questions. What we'll do is we'll go through those before the end of this broadcast here and try to get through as many as we can. So what questions do you have for Nick, for me, just regarding, I mean, really regarding anything, whether it be remote work, whether it be handling, your business, dealing with situations like this, whatever it might be. I've got a question here I'm seeing. Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and give to Nick. So Nick, what are some of the use cases that you've been seeing that people have been handling during this crisis? Like, what are some of the processes you've been seeing a lot of people working with at this time?
I see a lot of, so the people that are our clients, a majority of them, it's their first time ever going remote. So a huge thing that we're seeing is people not knowing about tools like Slack. In particular, Slack is kind of the first tool that I'm suggesting people to get on, and I'm seeing that is one of the lowest hanging fruits that most people don't have. In terms of process specifically, like, what do you mean exactly by that? Like, what process are people? I think that the biggest thing I'm seeing is people are having to pivot and change their business model right now because they might have something that requires you to be in person to deliver your product or service. So I think a lot of people are shifting business model overall to figure out how do you offer some variation of it where the delivery mechanism could be virtual.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, something I wanted to mention on that too. Something that I've been seeing. I've actually been looking at. I've got a lot of questions coming in now. Great, keep coming, keep putting them in. We'll be answering those. But I have been watching the data here at Process Street, and I've actually been working with some of my colleagues over at Zapier as well to look at some of their data. Really interesting trends that I've been seeing going on. Primarily, there's two big things that are happening. Either A, and this is of course for people who are still operating and that sort of thing. Of course, sadly, some companies have had to shut down, that sort of a thing. But the ones that are still operating, what I've been seeing is that they tend to actually be operating more heavily than normal. A lot of the ones that are working, they're actually working. They're picking up that slack that's sort of been created in the market, and they, a lot of the stuff that they're doing, if they are working, is that they are working on, first of all, a lot of their existing leads, a lot of their existing stuff, also working on their existing processes. So a lot of people right now at this time, which I imagine a lot of you guys who are on this webinar right now, maybe are in a similar sort of situation, a lot of people are working on their processes, so optimizing things. So they might not be taking in new clients, but they are making things work better, and they may be working through existing processes, existing checklists. And if you're working outside of Process Street, so some really interesting stuff, and I've been seeing that, of course, also in Zapier and some other tools as well.
Yeah.
Lots of stuff along those lines.
Yeah.
So
now's the best time to clean it up.
Yeah, most definitely. This is definitely the right time to be doing that. So I've got quite a few questions here. I'll go ahead and start fielding these. So we've got lots and lots. Okay, first one here. So first off, how can, let's see, this is a CPR. My question is CPR seem to be, all this stuff is new to them. How can they run them to understand them well? So how can they best understand some of these concepts that you kind of brought up?
Well, so in that link, ps.getleverage, there's some resources. One of the things that we're doing right now for people at Leverage is we're building them a remote roadmap. So we do a diagnostic in terms of how are you, basically taking you through CPR, but seeing how you're currently doing it and what your tech stack is, and identifying what are some processes that need help optimized. How are you communicating, project managing? Are you documenting anything? And then we build a roadmap in terms of, in a 30, 60, 90-day period, what should be the order of operations to clean up and get you that operational framework. So that's, I'm not trying to have a sales pitch for Leverage, but there's some free resources that I posted there, my free Facebook group, or if you need a roadmap, and this is all completely foreign to you, that's another thing that might be helpful.
Awesome. Yeah. So another question here, it's also from Michael Johnson, a question that was asked earlier as well. How would you recommend implementing Zapier when potentially dealing with sensitive data?
Mm. Well, I guess it matters like what you're trying to automate. So you could use Zapier. What you could do potentially is there's like some advanced things in Zapier where you could use something like AWS Lambda, which you could control that code base and all the information in Lambda. And you could simply use Zapier to trigger your AWS Lambda function, for example, to run. Now we're getting a little bit more advanced, but that's potentially one solution. But that's something that I would have to have a deeper conversation with someone to really solve that.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I've worked with quite a few companies in like the medical space, in the legal space, things of that nature. And realistically, also in education, realistically, the types of data that you're dealing with are going to first off, dictate what sorts of services you can use to even begin with, whether or not they're actually, say, for example, HIPAA compliant or SOPA compliant if you're in the US. And one of the things that I have seen work, depending on what sort of automations, what sort of data you are trying to send across, is essentially using either encryption or using, where you're storing the sensitive data somewhere else, and you're using a key to refer back to that data, and that key is what's getting sent across, which is not, of course, sensitive.
You can encrypt it and like have some ID that you're passing or something if you really need to.
Exactly. Yeah. So definitely something to consider there. Okay. Yeah. So another question here. Let's see. Okay, so it's just so long. I'm trying to like parse it out, so I'm not reading the whole thing. Well, I'm just going to read it. So it's from Agnes. So Nick, my company is partly documented, wiki, and processes as well, and optimized. For scaling the business, we actually need an SOP, but we failed several times in the process of SOP creation. It's always somehow messed up by the time. What do you suggest? How shall we collect processes and map them?
Yeah, there's no magic pill with this stuff, right? So one hack, I'll tell you one hack for process documentation if you have nothing right now and you're worried about, say, a key team member. Like if you are listening to this webinar and you're thinking to yourself, oh my God, if Blake gets sick tomorrow, Blake's the only person that knows how to run payroll, what's going to happen? If like you're having kind of that light bulb moment right now, the quickest thing that you could do just to de-risk to a large degree what you're sitting on is spin up a Zoom, hit the screen share button, and record yourself executing some of the core processes. Now, this is not a replacement at all for using Process Street and tools like Zapier. I mean, that's the right way of doing it. But if you're starting from zero, you could start with that. Now, with organizing SOPs, it could be to some degree that you weren't using a proper wiki like Notion. Some people, if you're trying to do this in like a Microsoft Word document, you're going to have a way lower probability of being successful. And one thing that you could do, a strategy, is you allocate time in your calendar, or you have an operations person allocate some time in their calendar every quarter to refining and cleaning up your processes and your SOPs. It's really important. And one of the things that everyone falls into the trap of is it's always quicker just to dump something somewhere, right? Like it's quicker if I'm not thinking through where I want to put a file, I'll just put it somewhere in Google Drive. That at least gets it into Google Drive. But then if I don't spend the extra 5 seconds to think through what's the most logical folder to put it in, it's going to take me 10 times longer to find it on the back end of that when I need to retrieve it. So investing up front saves you a lot of time on the back of it. And with constructing an SOP, it's similar to constructing folders in Google Drive or Dropbox, right? You don't want one folder with 10,000 files, and you don't want 10,000 folders with one file. So you have to figure out what that happy medium is to separate information. So again, it goes back to principle one. How do I set this up so that I can retrieve information as quickly as possible? So I hope that helps.
That's super helpful. Yeah. Obviously, here at Process Street, work with process a lot, right? So In addition to what Nick is saying, there's definitely a couple of things that I recommend. First off, I would say that, the first thing you want to do before you get into any sort of process documentation is, actually identifying what processes that you should document in the first place. And the way that I do that is I actually have a matrix. So first off, you want to think about things that are high priority. So what's going to actually cost you money if you don't get it done? So what's the things that, maybe it's handling clients, maybe it's your operations, whatever it might be. That's, high priority, right? From there, you've also got high frequency. How often do you use it? Is it once a year or is it every single day? If it's something that you're only going to use every year, well, it might not be nearly as important versus something you need to use often. And finally, you also got isolation, exactly what Nick said there for something like payroll. You want to make sure that things are not isolated to one person. That's just a really risky thing to do. So you want to make sure you're identifying, if something is currently only held in the brain of one person, that is also going to bring it up the list there. So once you've done that, you want to sort of mark each of those off, score those, maybe from 1 to 3, that sort of a thing. And at that point, you want to go ahead and figure out what are your top processes you need to work on, and then just pick the number one. Right? You just want to focus on one at a time. As you're using, Nick's methodology there, you want to make sure that you're focused. You're not trying to do 10 different things at once. You will absolutely mess things up if you do that. And then once you get into it, you want to do it just like you were. I mean, I know a lot of you guys do not develop software or anything like that, but the concept is agility. It's agile. You essentially want to do things in an efficient manner, doing things in layers, getting, the just the basics in there first and then working on the more advanced stuff later. Don't try automating, right from the beginning. Try and get the process good at the start.
And again, it's not necessarily, I mean, you will save time, like 100%, you're going to save time. And when you have to execute a process and you have it really well designed in Process Street with conditional logic and stops and all the robust functionality that Process Street has, and with Zapier, you will save time. But it's even regardless of the time savings per process, it's all about the reduction of risk. Like I mentioned earlier, it's one thing to save time every time you execute it, but if you can avoid the 1 in 10 times where there's a mistake and it takes you an hour to fix the mistake, that's another huge benefit that is a little bit less tangible, but you have to be aware of. And there's a great book called The Checklist Manifesto, written by a surgeon. And what they found was when they put checklists in surgical rooms, it reduced the rate of surgical errors by like 84%. So it's not just a time savings per time you execute it, it's an overall time savings on the reduction of risk that you're going to see too.
Absolutely. I should tell you the Checklist Manifesto is required reading here for everyone at Process Street. So another question here, I'm going to go ahead and, so I've got quite a few here. Pete, go ahead and keep submitting your questions. We're going to try and get through as many as we can by the end of this. But let's go ahead here. I'm going to try and keep it on topic, and then I'll kind of work this through in those orders. All right. So next here. So Faisal said, process stress testing is a great idea. Please expand a bit on how this can be done in an organization, especially who will be driving it, say the HR or the CEO.
Yeah. So just pick some core processes and you identify a role rotation. So this quarter, we're going to pick an HR process like team member onboarding. Great. Let's swap with the person that does payroll. And for a week, the payroll person onboards new team members and the person that did onboarding does payroll, for example. And that's a great way to stress test it. And everyone has their own processes. Even the CEO has their own processes that they're responsible for, that you could do a role rotation. Just pick something where there's not sensitive data that you're concerned about, but pick something like have two people on the same team swap positions for a week.
Excellent. Yeah, it's something that I recommend that you do in addition to doing it continuously, as Nick is mentioning. Definitely something that you do even when you're building your process. Continuously peer review. So it's great if you and someone else are working on their own processes. You guys are both working on your processes at the same time. If you switch them over, kind of like you would do in school where each person would grade each other's papers, similar concept, have that happen for your process and try and see if, things make sense. So great. Excellent. Another question here. So from Michelle, what if clients struggle with following processes? This is processes that you're actually giving to your clients.
fire him? No. I guess I would want to know more, like what process are you giving to clients? I mean, primarily we're using processes internally. One thing though that you could do, which is a big use case, especially of having processes get executed or kicked off, is a big use case is you could create an external form using like Wufoo or Typeform or any of those form builders. And if, say, you need to get some information from a client in order to kick off a project or something like that, you could give them a form to fill out to structure the data so you're for sure getting all the required information without having to add them to Process Street or teach them the tool. You could give them an external form, and then with Zapier, that could be a trigger. So the submission of that form could trigger a process in Process Street to get started. So I hope that helps. But as much as you can, you have to streamline processes. I found time and time again, when you start making exceptions and you let clients, I mean, even taking my business, we're doing, on-demand marketing and operations projects and tasks for clients. If we let any client communicate with us any way that they wanted and we didn't have a process, it would be extremely difficult to manage. So you have to come up with some SOPs and processes and kind of stick to it. And you want to make the client experience as easy as possible. So that Typeform hack is a really useful hack that a lot of people don't know about.
Yeah, actually, specifically on that, so just so anyone, so I imagine you guys, a lot of you are going to be Process Street users, even if you're not, totally cool. But if you are, you may or may not know that you can send your checklist to clients to have them fill out anonymously without having them to log in. However, oftentimes, if not most of the time, I actually recommend exactly what Nick said there, which is having them actually fill out something that might be more familiar. That might be a Google form, it might be SurveyMonkey, any of those other tools that are connected to Zapier and therefore can automatically fill out your Process Tree checklist the same way as if the person did it, except it may be a lot more familiar for them. And what I recommend is whenever you're designing any sort of process that's going to be client-facing, what you want to do is you want to consider it kind of like you're designing any sort of product, right? You want to find out who are your customers. What sort of demographic do they fit? What kind of technology are they going to be accustomed to? What sort of other tools might they be using? Are they used to Google Forms? Are they used to Typeform? What's going to feel more familiar for the bulk of them? You're of course going to have people that are on the fringes of that aren't necessarily going to be the norm. That's okay. You want to hit as many as you can. You can't please everyone. But by doing that, first and foremost, you're going to be able to make sure that you're not running into these issues as often. And then second, what you want to do is that you want to continuously pay attention and get feedback on those client-facing processes and find out, maybe if they're having trouble with it, find out why. Is it how you designed it? Is it just something for that one specific customer? And of course, if it's something that's larger and common, that's something that you may be able to address via optimization or automation. All right, so we've got a few more questions here. Let's see here. Oh, actually, here's a little bit of a clarification to that previous question. They mentioned that the clients are older, and as a project manager, I am helping them organize and execute sales and marketing plans in their companies. That is a common situation that, as people, different age groups are used to different types of technology. They use different types of things, maybe aren't really as familiar with technology in general. Of course, a lot of it can be unfamiliar and scary. So you want to make sure that you're providing things in the most user-friendly way possible for that particular type of user. Another question here. So again, guys, go ahead and make sure to submit some more of your questions. We could take a couple more probably before we close this out. So get those in now, just so you can get those answered before we close this. So I've got one here that's really interesting though. All right, so Nick, do you have a suggestion on how to handle, I know what you're going to say, how to handle a non-adaptable team member?
You know my answer.
I do.
Yeah, if they're not bought into the program, get rid of them. All this stuff, CPR, it really only works if you have alignment and buy-in from the team, right? It doesn't work if you have to start thinking, oh, well, Blake prefers Slack, but Nick won't use Slack. So with Nick, I have to text Nick, but then Sydney will use Asana, but won't use this only works, even the CEO, like everyone, you have to have full alignment and buy-in. Otherwise, you're just adding tools and actually it could hurt the productivity of the company. So, yeah, if you don't have buy-in from just one, I mean, if you don't have buy-in from the whole team, that's another issue. But if like 9 out of 10 people are bought in and you have one person that's like, no, I'm going to stick with text, it might not be a good fit.
Yeah. So ironically, we actually I did a webinar last month. I think it was last month now, or maybe 2 months ago. I forget. Time flies. On this topic exactly. So literally on how to get buy-in from your team. And what I had mentioned in that broadcast, without going into the whole thing, is realistically, whenever you're doing any sort of change, obviously you want to optimize your processes. You want to make things work really well. But of course, at the end of the day, the people who are going to use those tools or those processes are people, right? That's how this works. So you do want to keep that in mind. So you want to make sure that when you are developing things, you're creating things, you do want to make sure that it is going to work for the majority of people, that it's not going to be, so completely unfamiliar that everyone has to be vastly trained on something so different and complex for only a marginal increase in efficiency, right? So if it's something along those lines, don't do it, right? So if it's only going to give you a little bit of a benefit, you have to spend a lot of time for training everyone on having to do something that isn't going to really pay off. Don't do that. But obviously, if, as Nick mentioned there, you're going to get benefit, and almost everybody's going to be able to get in and get on board. Obviously, there's a process for making that happen in the first place. It's not immediate, but if you've got somebody who is so resistive to what's going on, first thing you want to do is, of course, find out why. It could be a very basic reason, and then it may actually be addressable very easily. But eventually, alas, if that person is not going to get on board, it's going to completely resist. And I know that everyone has people like this in their lives. Yes, unfortunately, you do have to eventually cut them out, just because you can't run a business that way. Unfortunately, you can't do anything that way. And people do need to be adaptive, including yourself, and you need to be able to compromise and for the good of the team. So you want to make sure you're building a community of that, both in your hiring and just generally in your culture.
Totally.
All right. So I think we could take, maybe if we have one more question that comes in, we will handle it. Otherwise, we will close this out. Let me just see if we get anything. Don't think we will, but let's just see if we do. And I don't think we are. All right. So I think I'm going to go ahead and close it out there. Nick, do you have any final words you'd like to say?
No. Look, this is a journey, not a destination, as I say. So you can never be too productive. There's always going to be new tools, new ways how to use tools. But the theory and that concept of CPR, you're always going to need to communicate with your team, project manage and plan with your team, and document knowledge. So just having some awareness there, and stay healthy, safe, and feel free to reach out to me. I gave you my contact earlier, and I hope that this was helpful for everyone.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, and thank you everyone again for joining today. Especially with everything that's going on, I really, really appreciate you guys taking the time to join us and be so engaged and give us so many really wonderful questions. So just so everyone knows, especially if there's anyone that missed this at all or maybe joined late, I think I mentioned this earlier, but this has been recorded. And what I will be doing is I will make sure to send out a follow-up email in the next few days. Takes a couple days to process. Once it's good, I will go ahead and send that out with the resources that Nick mentioned. Of course, you guys can go to some of that right now. So do definitely check those out. Again, that is ps.getleverage.com. Again, that is P as in process, S as in street.getleverage.com. I will put that in the email as well as any other resources. And again, of course, the recording of this webinar. So thank you. Thank you again so very much. Please stay safe. Please take care. If you have any Process Street questions, go ahead and submit those to support@process.st. And then, of course, we're going to be happy to get you any of those resources that Nick mentioned as well. Thank you again so much. And everyone have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thanks, guys.